Hi, Adam Victor, collector and dealer from USA. Adam, thank you for your taking the time. We're in the Monaco during a very special weekend for vintage watches. How did your journey with watches start?
My journey with watches goes back a long time, and I think it maybe
Imagine.
gives away my age a little bit. But when I was in high school, watches started for me, and this was some time ago.
Do you remember the first watch?
I remember the first watch very well. It was a gift, actually, from a good friend who gave me a steel and gold Movado when I was 17 years old on a bracelet.
This Movado is in your collection?
It's no longer in my collection. No,
terrible.
I didn't understand that in the future that would be particularly meaningful for me. So it was my first watch that that was impactful and made a difference for me with watches. I started to pay attention in a way that I didn't pay attention before. And I think it was mostly through my experience with my friends that the watch came into its own light for me. My friends noticed the watch on my wrist and were always commenting about how I was wearing a dress watch. And in a way, I loved it. I thought it was great. None of my friends wore watches. It was an entirely new thing. Okay. So that was kind of the beginning. The attention that I got from my friends about that watch, and then my appreciation for the beauty of the watch. It was really elegant and very refined in a way that I hadn't been used to experiencing things. So that was the first one. And thankfully not the last.
Oh, fantastic. There are many great auctions in the world. What do you think makes the Monaco Legend experience so unique?
There's a lot of things that contribute to this being a special place and a special auction house. I think the setting is incredible, but above all, it's the way that Monaco Legend Group treats clients, collectors, and friends. There's no feeling that you're here to have a transaction. When you come to Monaco, you're part of an experience with a group of people who are your friends in collecting and your friends in life. So it becomes a weekend in Monaco of full immersion for all things watches, and the further development of all of your friendships, with guys that you normally only see once or twice a year.
Okay.
So it's like a big party every time we get together, which is now twice a year, April and October. And Monaco Legend is expanding with another auction in June in Lugano, and I expect that will have the same sort of enthusiasm and charisma that the ones in Monaco have had. The embracing of the community by this house and its partners is really special, and there are elements of other auction houses that are really very nice and some incredible talent and scattered across all auction houses. But Monaco Legend is unique for the way that they're able to embrace the community and keep everyone together. We eat together, we go to the pool together, we dine together. It's 3 days with friends. It's pretty special.
It's not simple, is it? Okay. What do you love most about vintage watches?
I love that vintage watches give someone the opportunity to express their style even to another level. You have many options for contemporary watches and modern watches to buy because they represent who you think you are, who you want to be, or who you are in that moment. Vintage watches give you the chance to go even deeper with that, because there are more opportunities for watches that are pre-owned or vintage. There's a vast array of possibilities. And then there's always the element of patina and accessories, different straps, different bracelets. There's really limitless opportunities for people to express who they are with the watch that they choose. Vintage gives you that in a way that modern and contemporary watches, I think, can't.
And what do you think about the independent watchmaker?
It's interesting you asking me this question. As a person who's truly a vintage guy to his core, my sense is that the strength of the independent watchmakers in that market has been something that's been a little disturbing for me, because I felt like I missed missed it, right? And only recently have I come to embrace it in a way that's that is meaningful for me. You know, I have a lot of friends who collect independent watches, and I never really gave them, you know, much of a chance. You know, my first jump in was with Richard Mille, which I think you can kind of consider independent, or at least, you know, in a sense. Certainly groundbreaking and a pioneer, right?
Okay.
But the opportunity for independent watchmakers to do what they want and what they feel strongest about, without necessarily having a sense of obligation to understanding what the market wants, right? What would the market like to see? What size case does the market like? What metal does the market like? What size strap does the market like? No, independent watchmakers, and this is, their autonomy is fantastic. And once you start to take all of that in and recognize that each of the watches that these guys put together is really an expression of who they are in, you know, in their core. Some, of course, are more suited for me than others, but that's one of the things that's so great about it, is that now there are a lot of independent watchmakers out there, and so there's something to suit everyone's taste. I'm coming around. The biggest challenge is they're very hard to get. You know, you need to work on relationships for a very long time, you know, and sometimes you need to get lucky, you know, and
sometimes no.
Sometimes no. I think more often than not, no. Because the watches are special and because they're handmade, there's very few opportunities, and there are people that are really very aggressive about them. So, you know, time will tell, I guess, how collectible they are and how the independent market grows, but it's fascinating to watch. For me, from the outside.
Okay, fantastic. How do you see the vintage market changing in the next year?
Next year.
Yes. It's not simple. But
it's not a simple question. You know, one of the things that I've noticed over the last year and a half or 2 years or so, you know, give or take, is the enthusiasm of younger collectors in the market embracing parts of the market that were maybe previously not as explored. You know, there are a whole host of watches now that I see young collectors, men and women, getting really excited about, being aggressive about purchasing. Watches that are small, watches that have integrated bracelets, watches that have stones or things that are a little extravagant, you know, and for a long time were not in incredible favor, you know, but people are finding ways, because the watch community is growing, and you know, we all find our niche, you know, unless you're like me and you're obsessed with virtually all watches. But we find our thing and we go after it, and I think it's been really healthy for the market, and it's been really nice to see, as someone who's been doing this for a long time, to see guys and women that are young, that are energetic, that are buying things that I might not have looked at 5 years ago, but I'm looking at in a different light now, because I'm seeing people, young people with great personalities and incredible enthusiasm, talking about these watches and sharing these watches. So, you know, I'd like to think that you know, vintage watches in the market continues to be strong. You know, there are obviously, you know, the pressures of the economy in the USA in particular, and so, you know, we'll see. But so far, those economic pressures don't seem to be slowing Americans down from collecting watches. And in Europe, you know, my feeling and the experience that I have is that people buy with incredible passion, you know, and I don't think that passion can be tampered by, you know, mild economic swings, you know. So I don't know. I'd like to think that things are strong and going strong, and, you know, full steam ahead, you know.
And yes, and what do you think about the CPO program, the pre-owned of Rolex and Vacheron and so on?
Well, I think it's interesting. You know, I think it's great. I think that as someone who hasn't utilized those services yet, but has seen them and is aware of them, I would like to see the CPO program from Rolex being maybe more affordable in some capacity. I'm not sure if that's even possible. but it really limits, the cost of the service really limits the type of watch that can go in and benefit from that service. I think it's great because for certain people it provides them an element of comfort, right, and security.
Yes.
And so to know and understand that Rolex has seen the watch and they bless it and they've serviced it and they've had a good look, I think it can introduce new types of clients to the market. Who knows? Maybe it will be. It could be that the CPO program is a version of Patek Philippe extracts, and how important and critical those are for collectors to have with a vintage watch when they purchase Patek. It could be that the future for vintage Rolex is the absolute requirement of a CPO certificate. I think more and more it's important for collectors to feel connected to the brands, even when they have vintage watches, and to feel that the brand has seen the watch in some capacity. Maybe not all watches, but watches that are important to them and in their collections, that the brand has said, yes, that is as we made it.
Okay.
Sometimes even if the history of the watch is that it was polished and restored, or the dial was cleaned, this is part of the history of the watch. And if the brand is going to share that with you, I think it can actually open the minds of even some seasoned collectors to accepting things that might normally have been shunned, if that makes sense.
Is an opportunity for the vintage market to have to open to many people. Then
I think so.
Yes.
I think it provides independent security to certain clients that maybe the run-of-the-mill dealer might not be able to provide. It takes time to develop a relationship with a client where they will say, okay, I know that you've seen it and you've blessed it, so that it's going to be fine. It takes years to develop that. And then if it turns out that something is not fine down the road, for that client to go back to that dealer and know that that dealer will make that right and return the watch or whatever it is they decide to do, it takes a lot of time. With Rolex, you get that immediately. You have that sense of feeling and security, and so I think it's good. I also think, of course, it's an obvious opportunity for brands to be connected to collectors and be involved in an element of their brand that before that they really weren't embracing, not openly anyway.
Interesting. Questions. For me, it's very, very important. U.S. import duty
Yeah.
have any impact on the vintage watch market, in your opinion?
Well, I think it doesn't impact the vintage watch market as far as the inventory is concerned, which is sitting in the U.S., of course. But for certain, the origin of the watch and the import of the watch is now connected to duty that was not at the same level before. Of course, there's no way to know whether those duties will survive beyond the next week.
Okay,
with President Trump. The things can change in moments.
Also next hour, not next week.
It could be
tomorrow.
this afternoon. Any time
Yes.
is the right time for him
Yes.
to make a change.
To make a change.
So I think it's a consideration. I know that when I was flying here, and I'll be thinking about the strength of the dollar relative to the strength of the euro. I'll be thinking about the import duty that I need to pay to bring a watch back that I might acquire here. And so, it adds, the duty adds 10%, the additional tariff adds 10%, the currency exchange adds another couple of points. So it's a real consideration, and 10% on top of the price of a vintage watch is not insignificant,
Okay.
So I know I can't say what the average price of a watch that Monaco Legend Group is selling this weekend, because it's only just beginning. But on a $20,000 import with 10% extra taxes is not an insignificant thing. It's a consideration, And as a collector, I don't really care, But as a dealer, it's something that people have to consider. So I do think, as time goes on, if the tariffs remain intact, I think you're going to see some changes. How impactful and how broad, I guess, remains to be seen. In the same way that retailers in the USA are forced to, or will be forced ultimately to increase prices to consumers, I think that the dealers are going to be in the same situation.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay, Adam, thank you for,
Oh, my-
for your time.
my pleasure.
The appointment is in Lugano?
Yes,
Yes, in June.
in June. Yeah, June 5th, which I think is a Thursday. It's being held at in Lugano at the location, which I'm not sure maybe is already announced, but it's just a stunning hotel in a beautiful place with a magnificent view, and it'll be every bit as enthusiastic and charming as this event is, so I'm really looking forward to it actually.
Okay.
should be fun.
Okay, we see in Lugano.
Let's see you in Lugano.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.